Thank you. Mr Chair, I just want to state for the record my disappointment that during this debate the Sentencing Council hasn't been mentioned because I always find that a key part of any discussion by the Justice and Electoral Select Committee. I do also want to begin my remarks by acknowledging the Chair, and it's already been mentioned in this House, that Chester Borrows does deal with a diverse Select Committee that has robust debate within it. And although some of the difficult members have been named tonight, I have to say Lynn Pillay is not one of them. She is a picture of politeness and she has an inquisitorial mind. And having been a chair herself, she knows the difficulty of managing a select committee. But I would be remiss of me not to mention, as my colleague Simon Bridges did, Paul Quinn in this debate, because he always does make a robust contribution. And if Chester is going to offer up courses in the noble art of modulation, I just have to say for the record, I'm going to offer up courses on the art of using one's inside voice, because it's something that I have to say Paul Quinn has never mastered the art of the inside voice, and nor has he inside the House, and I think that all members of this place would benefit from the use of the inside voice, but inside both in tone and volume, but also in perhaps the art of thinking before one speaks. I would also like to acknowledge the work of the Minister, and in his defence I would say, who needs modulation when you've mastered the art of the personal attack? Now, I know that Minister Finlayson would like to claim that, of course, he never makes things personal, but he's just so good at it that sometimes you don't even know that it's happening. But I do want to acknowledge the fact that he has worked for a number of years on this piece of legislation. I will go over a little bit of the history on this bill in my remarks, but before I move on from my notes of thanks, I will acknowledge also the work of the officials, because at every point during the discussion on this bill, whenever we raise the need for us to go back, for instance, and look at some additional jurisdictions where we might have been able to see whether we were in keeping with what was happening overseas, they were always more than willing to bring forth not only what we asked for, but more again. So I do want to thank them for their assistance. Going back briefly to some of the history of this piece of legislation, I want to start with the Law Commission report, because that's really where it all began. We did have reports in 88, 2000 and 2007, but that was probably the one which really substantively triggered the piece of work that we see before us now. And of course it was the Labor government at that time that asked for a substantive review by the Law Commission. As we did with many other controversial areas, more controversial than this, and of course the one that may spring to mind is the Law Commission's extensive piece of work on alcohol reform, a piece of work which is the most comprehensive we have seen in this House, probably in our lifetimes, whether you're no matter what age you may have in this House, but it does traverse every element of our alcohol legislation. I just want to note for the record, a shame that not all of those recommendations were put before a select committee for them to decide. But going back to this Law Commission report, one of many that Labor instigated, in December 2007 it became the basis of which a draft bill was sent to stakeholders for consultation. But that wasn't the end of it. There was a reference group, and I think that Minister Finlayson may have referred to this. That was set up in 2008, chaired by Justice Blanchard, and included representatives from the New Zealand Law Society, the Bar Association, the Ministry of Justice, and PCO, but also, as Minister Finlayson has already acknowledged, the goodwill of the Minister of Justice at that time, the Honourable Annette King, meant that she included in that reference group Chris Finlayson himself, who at that time was an opposition MP. I think, again, demonstrating that limitation legislation is an incredibly important piece of legislation within our justice system. It sets the boundaries. It seeks out the balance between giving certainty to defendants and access to justice for claimants. And I think that is in particular an area that goes beyond political boundaries. And that was acknowledged, I think, by Annette King, and I just wish to acknowledge her in this final reading. But in this final reading, I do want to go over some elements of the bill that we never touched on during committee stages, less controversial, but were picked up in the discussion by Select Committee, so that probably means they're slightly more substantive. We've talked a little bit, I believe, about equitable claims. Now, the committee recommended inserting a new clause, that's 8A, to the bill, and that was to give clarity that the court will not be prevented from applying statutory limitation provisions to equitable claim for which no limitation defence is set out in this bill already. So there isn't a limitation there that exists for the court. An element of discretion applies. We've already discussed at some great length the one area, or one of the areas, but the significant area where dispute still lies, and that's around long stop periods. And I think that it was the right thing to do for Honourable David Parker to put up an amendment to try and bring consistency between what's in the bill and the Building Act. And it is disappointing the government chose not to adopt that amendment. And only time will tell as to whether or not we will see people's access to justice limited by the fact that the government has chosen not to adopt this element of consistency which we advocated for. And in particular, there will be areas, Auckland is probably the area most significantly affected by the leaky buildings phenomena, which I remember distinctly when it arose. And Maurice Williamson himself will be the one that ultimately will be having to re-look at cases if we find that the limitations that are being set are not working. So again, only time will tell, but for the record, Labor believed in consistency in setting a 15-year long stop period in limitations and in the Building Act. There wasn't much from my recollection discussion around the New Zealand Bill of Rights, and the committee, from memory, only very briefly looked at claims under BORA and whether they should be subject to discretion, and similar to the discretion that we looked at in terms of time-barred claims for sexual abuse of a minor, and decided against including discretion in that area, again erring on the side of certainty in that regard. Defamation, another area I don't recall us touching on much in the discussion, but worth flagging again that there was discussion on this, and that we heard concerns that if the knowledge period for defamation is 3 years, as set out in the bill, which, as it was introduced and given to us, then anomalies might arise. So our recommendation was that the late knowledge period should be shortened to 2 years. And I think that is in keeping with the types of claims we're likely to see under that heading. We've already discussed claims of sexual and non-sexual abuse of a child. And I touched on the claims of gradual process disease or infection, and I do wish to flag that was Labor that pushed quite hard that the exception for gradual process claims be inserted into that bill, and I'm proud that we did that. I do still have ongoing concerns around the interaction between ACC and the limitation requirements, predominantly because of the changes in policy and practice we've seen within ACC, and any constituency member of this House will know those all too well. And the final amendment, actions based on acts or omissions, around the late knowledge exception. But I believe my time is about to expire, so I won't dwell on that. Again, a useful discussion, good cooperation between the Select Committee, an important bill. I believe I'm going to call it a standing ovation that I'm receiving by Hone Harawira, because standing and whilst applauding. And I would like to note for the record, and for some viewers who have given me feedback that I need to reduce my airline type gesturing, that I hope that they saw some improvement in that last address. Kia ora koutou.